Mindhunter is a popular Netflix American thriller series that first aired in October of 2017. However, following the show's recent release of Season 2, fans and thriller addicts are abuzz all over the internet. The show revolves around FBI agent and profiler Holden Ford. While some minor details have been changed, a great majority of the show is based on real-life people and cases that shocked the nation. Many actors, writers, and producers came together in creating the show while paying special attention to the characters that are based on actual criminals. It's hard to sift through what is fact and what's fiction, but here's some real-life criminals the show's amazing cast are based on. Number 5. In Mindhunter, Holden Ford comes across a man named Monty Russell, played by Sam Speck. The character is known for being unopen and trusting with investigators, and especially Holden. Despite Russell not being a notorious household name like many criminals before and after him, his crimes were shocking and little to nothing is held back in the plot of the show. In fact, the series stays accurate and true to history as possible. The real Monty Russell, now aged 60, was an American serial killer who went on a crime spree from 1976 to 77, during which he preyed on young women in situations that ultimately ended in tragedy. His crimes mostly played out in a small radius covering his hometown of Alexandria, Virginia. Investigators quickly took to studying 5 cases of young women with eerily similar conditions and circumstances. Within the first few days of investigation, they connected the 5 cases and assumed that they were the work of a serial killer. During this time, Monty was in and out of various mental institutions. He was known for manipulating his doctors into thinking he was doing better so that he could leave the establishment and carry out his dark desires. In October of 1977, shortly after what would be 19-year-old Monty's last attack, he was apprehended and instantly put into the system. Officers and detectives that worked the case recall Monty being a particularly difficult prisoner. Despite copious amounts of evidence against him, he stood by his alleged innocence. Eventually, he was offered a deal that would allow some of his lesser charges to be dismissed if he pled guilty to the more serious charges. He agreed and was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms. The character based on Monty in Mindhunter accurately reflects the alleged reports of Monty being difficult and untrusting. Also, he was a master manipulator and would find ways to gain trust of prosecutors in an attempt to convince them about his innocence. Overall, the details of Monty's crimes and his overall personality, right down to the subtle mannerisms, are brought to life on screen by the talented Sam Speck. Number 4. Jerome Henry Brudos, also known simply as Jerry Brudos, was an American serial criminal who set out on female targets. Jerry began his activity in early 1968. The locations of his crimes, which involved 4 men, occurred in Oregon. His last attack was in 1969, making his spree a very short one. Perhaps it's due to the minimal time frame in which Jerry carried out his crimes, or perhaps the media coverage painted such a unique image of the man, but Jerry Brudos seems to have been forgotten by many and is also not considered a notorious household name. The media had a specific obsession with Jerry, although the flame dwindled out very quickly. However, Jerry was well known as being passionate and deviant in his romantic interests. He was given the nickname the Lust Criminal and the Shoe Fetish Slayer. Jerry held a specific attraction to shoes and feet and would often dress in high heels after completing his crimes. Prior to his convictions and presence in media, Jerry spent time in a mental institution after attempting to abduct someone. While there, doctors discovered that Jerry's mother wanted a daughter, not a son, and the issues arose from that point, which sparked what would be considered as a strange attraction. After his time in the ward, Jerry seemed to slow down and settle into an everyday average Joe life. He even got married and moved into a new home. Of course, as you know, that tranquility didn't last long, and eventually he embarked on his spree, which led to his arrest and incarceration. Happy Anderson portrays this fictional version of Jerry Brudos in Mindhunter. While some details have been altered for the storytelling sake of the show, much of the crimes and behaviors demonstrated by Happy Anderson are accurate and based on real evidence. When Holden first meets Jerry, he instantly considers him an important case to be studied and strengthen his profiling skills. Holden considers Jerry's case an important profiling suspect because his childhood trauma and events that came together to push him over the line. This also rings true in the real world because psychologists, profilers, and investigators did in fact find Jerry to be a significant example of how criminals are bred. Number 3. This American serial criminal, Richard Benjamin Speck, was unique from other criminals and the patterns we've come to know about them. Instead of stretching his crimes over the course of several months or years, like most do, he packed all of his twisted work into one night. On July 13, 1966, Richard knocked on the door of a student housing establishment which held 8 female student nurses. The home worked as a dorm, and for reasons unknown, the usual house mother, which is common in dorms and sororities, was not there. Richard convinced the young woman to let him into the house by faking an injury. As the nurses scrambled to do what they did best, Richard turned on them. He threatened them, which kept them from screaming and trying to run. Throughout the rest of the night, Richard fulfilled his disturbing desires well into the early morning hours of July 14, 1966. At first, there was speculation that Richard may have originally planned to rob the dorm. Tests showed that he was both drunk and high on the night of the crimes, which led investigators to ponder if perhaps his actions were not well thought through, and that he didn't fully comprehend the consequences that he would face. However, as more details came to light, it was very clear that Richard was a sick man with a sick passion. Speck was officially apprehended 2 days after the spree, thanks to a witness report who saw him in the city. While on trial, a tremendous amount of DNA and circumstantial evidence was put to light against Richard. He was sentenced to life in prison, where he spent the last of his days until 25 years later. The real Richard was rude and withdrawn, though he did express many of his unsettling desires and actions. The Richard Speck portrayed in Mindhunter stays relatively true to form. However, the character played by Jack Erdy is much more vulgar, disgusting, and downright mean. He takes on a more evil and violent personality, which makes every scene an outstanding performance. While meeting criminals and trying to gain as much information as possible about profiling, Holden becomes frustrated with Richard, who only wants to make matters more difficult. Eventually, in desperation, Holden stoops to Richard's level and, according to reviews, puts his career in danger. This event also sparked an internal FBI investigation at the start of Season 2. Number 2. Darrel DV Eyre was a criminal that carried out a heinous crime in late November of 1979. The crime involved an innocent woman, and a witness had seen a man with long dark hair and a beard driving a black Ford Pinto with mag wheels, driving away from what would be later discovered as the crime scene. It was surprisingly easy for officers to put out a warrant on any man fitting this description, and 5 days after the initial crime, Darrel was apprehended driving the exact car that he was during the crime. DNA and circumstantial evidence played a role in his arrest and eventual conviction of Darrel DV Eyre. However, the most important element in putting the criminal behind bars was his own statement he gave to police during their first interrogation. In the statement, DV Eyre admitted to his crimes. He was given a life sentence, and an interesting aspect of this investigation is that detectives aimed to mislead him. In the Mindhunter novel by author John E. Douglas, the conditions of Darrel's interrogation are shared. Douglas stated that this was his first opportunity to stage an interrogation, using methods that are in place to confuse or manipulate a criminal. Larger folders full of blank or irrelevant paperwork give the illusion that the officers have a hefty amount of incriminating evidence against the suspect. Douglas also went as far as falsely siding with Darrel, stating that his victim asked for it. This tactic lowers the suspect's defense and makes it more likely for them to open up about the truth. An object from the crime scene was also placed in front of Darrel to prove that DNA samples were available to prosecutors, and that confessing the truth may get him closer to a decent plea bargain. In Mindhunter, this interrogation, as well as many other facts of the case, are depicted in an almost identical manner as to what really happened. Actor Adam Zastro gives an amazing performance which impressively features the mannerisms of the real Darrel who was studied while imprisoned. The impulsive attack becomes a valuable source of information for Holden as he studies the suspect and aims for justice. Overall, the specific portrayal of the case is perhaps one of the most accurate in the show, because it even portrays small details such as a polygraph test that many people may have never known about, considering the criminal here was also not a notorious household name, despite significant media attention. Number 1. Edmund Kemper, also known as Ed Kemper, is one of the more well-known criminals depicted in Mindhunter. Ed was an American serial killer who collected 10 victims over the course of his 10-year crime spree, which began in 1964 and ended in 73. Kemper was known for his female victims that he met at coeducational college establishments. An interesting fact about Ed's actions, which professionals have studied for years, is that Ed didn't seem to have much of a preferred profile for his victims. In fact, he went after his own grandparents when he was just a teen. He was also committed to a mental institution, and upon his release, he gained a whole new desire for specific victims. In Mindhunter, this specific issue is discussed when Holden first meets Ed. Cameron Britton portrays Kemper in the series, and online reviews have referred to him as a scene stealer, especially in Season 1. Considering that Ed Kemper is a more well-known criminal, the audience gets a more accurate understanding of how well Cameron's performance really is. Additionally, this case is one of the most accurate in the show, as it pulls almost every detail, no matter how small, from the real criminal and the cases he caused. In the show, Holden often sees Ed while investigating the most notorious of them all, Charles Manson. Many fans began to question if Ed and Charles were really in the same situation, and it turns out that that fact is accurate. The pair apparently spent much time together in one location before Charles moved elsewhere. However, it's unclear if the pair had a friendship or even spoke. Ed Kemper is still in prison to this day after being found guilty for the 8 crimes that followed his release from the mental institution. He's eligible for parole in 2024. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep updated with our videos. And if you enjoyed this narration, maybe consider checking out my personal channel at youtube.com/Ty_knots.